Now, with all the stories making the headlines here and around the world this Tuesday, it's the news at 10.
The crisis deepens at the BBC. The corporation itself has reported tonight that the unnamed BBC star sent abusive and menacing messages to a second young person he met on a dating app. It came after a difficult day in which the BBC Director General had to explain why the corporation was so slow to react to the first complaint.
What I want to do at this current point is calmly get through the investigation that the police need to make sure they're supported and get through making the right decisions.
And in the past hour, The Sun has published an extremely detailed account of yet another encounter with what appears to have been a third young person, which it is claimed breached lockdown regulations. Also on News at 10 tonight. Wards closed, services suspended. A shocking new investigation by Dan Hewitt reveals the true cost of our crumbling hospitals. The highest mortgage rates since 2008, but could they rise still further? She's done it! She had a baby only 6 months ago. The incredible story of the Ukrainian player who has just beaten the world #1 at Wimbledon. And courage and resilience. A new play at the National explores the Grenfell fire.
This is ITV News at 10 with Tom Bradby.
Good evening. There is always the possibility that in cases of apparent misconduct, a trickle of allegations becomes a flood. We are not at that point quite yet in the case of the unnamed BBC presenter, but there have been new and serious developments tonight. First, the BBC itself reported allegations that the presenter sent threatening and abusive messages to another person in their 20s when they hinted at revealing his identity. Then, a short time ago, The Sun claimed the presenter had broken pandemic lockdown rules to meet a 23-year-old stranger from a dating site. Earlier, the BBC's Director General, Tim Davie, acknowledged that the corporation's reaction to the first allegation being made had not been nearly swift enough. London's Metropolitan Police has meanwhile asked the BBC to pause its own corporate investigation into the first young person, but another police force, South Wales, says it was contacted in April about the welfare of an adult.
Just as the BBC attempts to calm the storm, fresh allegations, more potentially damaging claims about the BBC presenter accused of paying for sexually explicit images from a teenager, just hours after the corporation had responded to the initial allegations.
These are clearly damaging to the BBC. It's not a good situation.
On a day he should have been talking about record profits, the Director General was fielding questions about the BBC's handling of the complaint.
Under my leadership, we will absolutely be as transparent as we can. The process was run, and we now need to take stock and review the process. What I want to do at this current point is calmly get through the investigation that the police need to make sure they're supported and get through making the right decisions and the balance between duty of care, privacy, and a very serious allegation.
He's now ordered a review into how complaints are red flagged within the organisation. But after that interview, BBC News reported fresh claims that the presenter sent threatening messages to a person in their early 20s after they met on a dating app, and the person hinted they might name him online. And tonight, in The Sun, a 23-year-old person claims the BBC presenter broke COVID lockdown rules to meet them in February 2021 after they'd met on a dating app. Back to the original allegation, the BBC say on the 18th of May, a family member went to a BBC building to try and make a complaint. The next day, the investigations team assessed it as serious but not a criminal allegation and emailed back to verify the claims, but there was no reply. So on the 6th of June, a phone call was made, but the call didn't connect. 7 weeks later, when The Sun contacted the BBC with criminal allegations, the Director General and the presenter were told. On Sunday, he was suspended. And yesterday, the BBC were told to pause their investigation so the Met Police can assess whether there's any evidence of a criminal offence. Even the Prime Minister in Lithuania for the NATO summit added his comments.
Obviously, they're very serious and concerning allegations, and that's why I'm pleased that the Culture Secretary spoke to the Director General of the BBC over the weekend and is confident that the BBC is investigating this both rigorously and rapidly. I think that's the right course of action.
Trust is, of course, at the foundation of the BBC, and today I asked the Director General why licence fee payers should still trust the corporation. He insisted he's committed to navigating this complex situation with care and diligence, and says he has faith that people will see the BBC is precious and doing the right thing.
It's now in the hands of the police to determine whether any laws have been broken.
And Rebecca is here to talk about all this. I mean, look, basically, it's getting more complicated for the BBC, isn't it? I mean, quite a, pretty serious, really, new allegations tonight.
Yeah, I think the stakes have been raised even higher tonight. We now have more than one allegation of a criminal offence. First, there were the claims that the BBC presenter paid for indecent images of someone under the age of 18. Tonight, there are allegations that he broke COVID lockdown rules by defying the rules during the pandemic. Then there's the third allegation that he sent threatening messages, not necessarily a crime, but I think they're all potentially highly damaging for both the presenter and for the BBC. Now, it's important to point out that at this stage, these allegations are just that. Though the police are investigating whether there is any evidence of any criminal offences, no formal police investigation has been launched, hence why this individual is not being named publicly. They have a reasonable expectation of privacy, but it's hard to see amid so much attention, amid so much speculation, how the presenter or the BBC can come out of this entirely unscathed.
OK, Rebecca, thank you very much indeed. You had a very, very busy evening, lots of developments. Thank you very much for explaining them very clearly. Now, one of the main reasons for today's NATO summit in Lithuania was to show a united front in its response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. But uniting NATO is not uppermost in President Zelensky's mind. He has a country to defend after all. So no wonder he is frustrated that NATO won't offer him a timetable for membership of their protective alliance. Absurd, he called it, before he flew in. Once he got there, he told cheering crowds he wanted strong partners, not ones who look over their shoulders at aggressors.
Ukraine may not be in NATO yet, but in Eastern Europe, in countries like Lithuania that share both a history and a border with Russia, Ukraine is already a close and indispensable ally. At an impromptu rally in Vilnius, President Zelensky had brought a flag flown above the battlefield of Bakhmut, a battle, he said, that was not just for Ukraine, but to keep Europe free from the threat of Russian occupation. So when he heard earlier today this summit was going to produce no firm invitation for his country to join NATO once the war's over, his response was scathing. I came here today, he said, believing in resolve, believing in our partners, believing in a strong NATO, in a NATO that doesn't doubt, that doesn't waste time, doesn't turn to look back at an aggressor. President Biden is the key decision maker on what Ukraine gets here. His number one priority, it seems, is alliance unity, to avoid encouraging Putin with the slightest sign of a split.
We agree on the language that you proposed, relative to the future of Ukraine being able to join NATO. And we're looking for a continued united NATO.
The split, though, may come with Ukraine itself, with the President Zelensky, who's come to this summit no longer as a supplicant, but as the leader of a country that for more than 500 days has fought for Europe's security. Ironically, the very thing NATO was formed to do. Ukraine's defence minister, one of the leaders of that fight, explained to me exactly how Ukraine sees itself after a year and a half of painful sacrifice.
Our defending capability not only for Ukraine, but only for Europe, because we are eastern flank or eastern shield of Europe. And it's very important level of interoperability among Ukraine and other countries. We are right now the member of NATO allies de facto. It will become the member of full-fledged the Europe.
That's why Zelensky, at a dinner with NATO leaders tonight, is telling them it's about respect. Ukraine deserves respect. Will that translate into anything more concrete from this summit? At this stage, it seems unlikely.
And James joins us now. James, we were clearly expecting more for Ukraine. Why are they not getting what they want?
Well, it's interesting that for many years there have been those who've told us that NATO's expansion into Eastern Europe has been driven by America's desire for global domination. So ironically today it is the Americans who are slow walking this. It is President Biden, backed up by the Germans, who doesn't want and has basically forbidden the alliance from making firm commitments to Ukraine on future membership. Instead, the communique tomorrow is likely to say that they will extend an invitation when allies agree and conditions are met. So no wonder in many ways the Ukrainians are reasonably unhappy with that, because it's much less than they were looking for. They will get a promise that some of the hoops they'd have to go through if they ever do get invited will be got rid of, and that there will be security guarantees in the meantime of the sort that the US supplies to Israel, saying, you know, we won't fight for you, but we will give you the weaponry and the technical support to do that. But for the Ukrainians tonight, very disappointing. Obviously they'll have to live with it, they'll have to wear it, but it won't be the historic summit here that they'd been hoping for.
OK, James, thank you very much indeed. Well, let's come back here. And staff shortages, strikes, post-COVID demand, our ageing population, all pressures the health service is struggling to overcome. And all the while, hospital staff in England trying to beat the backlog are having to close wards and treatment centres because of crumbling buildings. An investigation by Daniel Hewitt and his team has found almost half of England's hospitals have had to shut wards. 42% have had wards, departments or services temporarily or indeed permanently closed due to structural or repair issues. There were 67 incidents last year, and it's getting worse. That's 42% more than in 2020.
In some NHS hospitals, when it rains, it pours is not just a saying, but a reality. This was shared with us by a doctor on shift at a London hospital, described by bosses as a minor leak. Others sent us these pictures from the Queen Elizabeth in Norfolk, where disrepair is so frequent and familiar, these signs have been placed all around the hospital, telling patients to report leaks and cracked ceilings. At St Mary's Hospital in West London, staff have been driven to breaking point by this crumbling estate. Scaffolding holds up part of a tired building that is plagued by leaks, disrepair and decrepit conditions. This was an infectious diseases ward before it became structurally unsafe and had to be closed. In this, one of London's busiest hospitals, delivering first-class care, parts of it are now unusable. Each empty room a homage to neglect.
We deliver really high-quality care for our patients and our local community here, but it's falling down. When a ward closes, that puts more pressure on our teams who are working in the emergency department, where repairs are going on, where water's coming through ceilings or windows, where we're having to shut beds because a space is no longer safe. It just makes it so hard and really demoralising for staff.
And in some parts of this hospital, the battle has been lost.
The beams you can see up here were propping up the floor of the ward where patients were treated. Not only is this closed, obviously, it's been completely condemned. This is beyond any economical repair, a complete waste of much needed clinical space.
But patients do suffer as a result. In Rochdale, former nurse Gina Jackson was admitted to Fairfield General Hospital after having a stroke. It was July 2021 during a heat wave. She says the showers were broken, and inside the hospital the heating was on and stayed on for several days. Dehydrated, Gina had to be placed on a drip.
The consultant came in and said, make sure these people are hydrated. No air conditioning, no fans. Literally a window open, 6 inches, I'd say. And then there was another woman who ended up on a drip. It made me feel like a prisoner. I won't wish you were my worst enemy.
Fairfield General Hospital told us they're now investigating the conditions in which Gina received her care. So is anything being done about this? The Health Secretary told us yes, standing by a pledge to build 40 new hospitals by 2030, despite delays to the programme.
We've committed the biggest ever investment into the NHS estate. We've also invested in our maintenance programme. But again, it's not just
But you haven't delivered on those 40 new hospitals, have you?
We are committed to 40 new hospitals.
But they were supposed to be done by 2030. Now most of them are starting in 2030 and will take potentially decades to build. So we're looking at 10, 15 years down the track.
No, we're doing it differently. So we're committed to 40 hospitals by 2030.
But St Mary's won't be one of them. Initially on that list of 40, the rebuild has been delayed beyond 2030, a promise that feels as empty as the wards they no longer use. Daniel Hewitt, News at 10.
Another painful threshold was passed today for anyone whose fixed-rate mortgage is coming to an end. The average 2-year rate is now at its highest level for 15 years, higher even than after that now infamous Liz Truss quasi-Kwarteng. Remember them? Mini-budget. The rate, 6.66%. The devil, you might say, is in that detailed figure, and it may have to go higher still because average wages have been rising more than expected. The Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, said tonight he knew people up and down the country were feeling pain.
The economy is still running hot. Interest rates are going up to cool it. And at the First Fence factory in Derbyshire, that's making life harder for both existing and would-be mortgage holders.
If mortgages keep going up, I definitely need a pay rise just to be able to manage each week.
Due to the cost of mortgages and the cost of living, I can't afford to save a deposit.
But tonight, the Chancellor told ITV there was no alternative.
The most effective, the quickest, the surest way to get inflation down is through interest rates, but I totally recognise that that causes a lot of pain for people who are renewing their mortgages, but this is the quickest way we get through this very difficult patch.
In Parliament today, lenders said they expected to have to help more mortgage holders.
What I expect to see over the next 6 months is that we will see more customers with financial stress, customers that are experiencing financial difficulties at maturity. That's when we explore to understand what kind of forbearance measures may be appropriate.
Here's the problem. Mortgages hit a 15-year high today at 6.66% for the average 2-year fixed-rate mortgage. Those are high because the Bank of England has been repeatedly raising its interest rate. It's now at 5%, but is widely expected to go higher still. And that's because the bank needs to slow the economy to control inflation, which remains stubbornly high at 8.7%. But new figures show pay still rising at a record 7.3% today in the 3 months to May. Now, although that's not keeping up with inflation, it could still drive prices higher.
We've seen the rise in wage inflation for two reasons. One is because of the sharp increase in energy prices and people wanting very naturally to maintain their living standards. A second reason is that the labour market has been very tight. Unemployment has been at what are historically very low levels.
If there was a glimmer of good news today, it was that more people are returning to work. Vacancies are down a bit and unemployment is slightly up, meaning the labour market may be starting to cool down. Carl Dinnan, News at 10.
And a man who has some answers is here. Robert, of course. I guess, look, many people watching this programme tonight will be worried. They may be suffering. You know, interest rates are very high. If you're a bit overstretched, it's very scary. What is going to happen?
So interest rates are going to rise more. The next opportunity for the Bank of England to put up rates is beginning of August. And, you know, my assumption, looking at the pay figures we saw today, which are much higher than the Bank of England would have expected only a few weeks ago, and the Bank of England will see them as inflationary, even though, just to be absolutely clear, they are below the prevailing rate of inflation. So people are still getting actually poorer in real terms. But the problem is that the target for the Bank of England is 2%, wages going up 7.3%. If that then is replicated in prices, it just shows you how far we are from getting back to 2%, and that's why, when it comes to August, we'll see probably another 0.5 percentage point added to the bank base rate, feeds through to other interest rates paid by all of us in the economy. And if you look at what both market prices are discounting, there's another word for saying predicting, and also sort of look at what economists are forecasting, you know, we're currently at 5. I'm saying 5.5 in August. By the time we get through this cycle of upward rises, we may be looking at 6.5%, 7%. Now, unfortunately, if that is where we have to get to in terms of the bank's role in trying to suppress inflation, there will be a lot of negative consequences. One of them will almost certainly be house prices a lot lower. And let's be clear, in a way, that is an outcome that the Bank of England will be willing, because you know, you have to think about what is the transmission mechanism from putting up interest rates to getting inflation down. Well, you've got to reduce demand in the economy. When there's a so-called wealth effect, houses go down in price, people spend less. Similarly, as we all know, when interest rates go up, people are a lot poorer, they have to pay more for mortgages. One of the things that is frustrating policymakers is these lags, because of course interest rates get repriced in batches because of these fixed rate mortgages. It's a slow transmission mechanism. It's a painful transmission mechanism for all of us. And what I say worries me most is that at the end of the day, the Bank of England may err on the side of doing too much. And at that point, huge economic cost for all of us if we slip into not just a shallow recession, but something that could be a bit worse than that.
OK, Robert, for now, thank you very much indeed. Now, right around our world this week, weather records are tumbling in the next few days. Temperatures in southern Europe, especially Italy, will touch dangerous highs. In the past few, rainfall levels have broken records in Asia. Scientists say the warming of the planet means the atmosphere can hold more moisture, so when it does rain, the downpours are heavier.
In Japan, the heaviest rain ever recorded swept away homes and hillsides in the Fukuoka prefecture. An elderly couple died after becoming trapped in their house. Torrential downpours have caused major flooding in both the far north and south of China, forcing the evacuation of thousands of people. Across the planet, in diverse and distant continents, it is the same story of extreme weather with the same explanation.
It means we've got more heat and energy in the atmosphere, more heat in the Earth system, which means that the air can hold more water. And that means the clouds can hold more water, and that leads to heavier, more intense rainfall, which leads to serious flash flooding.
In many of the countries that have experienced a deluge, there are also parts in drought and experiencing severe heat. The first week of July was the warmest week on record so far, with a global average of above 17 degrees. Shijiazhuang in China has hit 40 degrees. Baghdad has recorded up to 45 degrees. In the US, Phoenix is expecting a 12th consecutive day of at least 43 degrees, while parts of Spain are forecast to hit an unbearable 45 degrees. Tourists in Madrid have been doing what they can to stay cool.
Just lots of breaks in the shade and lots of water to keep us hydrated. Yeah, that's pretty much what we've been doing the last couple of days.
And the bad news is this might only be the start of it. Climate experts have warned that the effects of this year's El Niño weather pattern are yet to kick in.
So we're seeing these high temperatures in the North Atlantic, etc., despite the fact that El Niño hasn't really got going yet. We can expect much higher temperatures from the El Niño in the latter half of the year, in sort of October, November time.
It seems there is hardly a season goes by without some catastrophic weather event in one corner of the world. But this year and this month, climate wake-up calls have been ringing loudly from the Americas to Asia and several places in between. Debbie Edward, News at 10.
The power of sport, endlessly to surprise and write barely believable stories of achievement, was illustrated once again today at Wimbledon. Take that, Evelina Svitolina. She's from Ukraine. She had a baby 6 months ago. In fact, she was a wild card, unseeded outsider. She was playing the world #1, a friend of hers, Iga Swiatek, who is Polish. Yes, you guessed it. She did it.
Ukrainian Alina Svitolina said she wants to bring some happiness to her country during her time at Wimbledon. And yet the unseeded wildcard who's back after having a baby 6 months ago didn't expect to get this far. In fact, she had to sell Harry Styles' concert tickets to attend her previous match.
Listen to that crowd.
But today, early on, she looked as though she should have backed herself as much as the crowd did, taking the first set against world #1 Iga Swiatek. Polish Swiatek may wear Ukrainian colours in an act of solidarity, but she made Svitolina work for her eventual win, taking it to a tight tiebreak and claiming the second set.
It's long.
But Svitolina took advantage of Swiatek's errors in the third and powered to 6-2 in just over 40 minutes.
She's done it!
You know, today was an unbelievable match, and I'm really happy I could win this one.
And the woman who knocked the world #1 out of Wimbledon has celebration in her sights tonight.
Well, first of all, I'm gonna have a beer, probably.
Before she heads to the semi-finals on Thursday. Ellie Pitt, News at 10.
That's an uplifting story. Now, finally, it was always going to be a sensitive and difficult job writing a stage play about the Grenfell Tower fire. But a new production at the National Theatre in London, which explores the courage and resilience of the residents, is true to life and death. That is because it is based on the words of some of those who lived through it.
The day before the fire, it was kind of relaxing morning for me.
A play about a tragedy. In the rehearsal rooms of the National Theatre, Grenfell, in the words of survivors. The story of the disaster in 3 acts.
For me as a performer coming into a job like this, just knowing that it's the words of the survivors. I think there's been so much around Grenfell, but it hasn't come directly from the survivors.
If you look at the view from the tower,
the characters are real-life residents, and it's set in the West London Tower before, during and after the fire, where 72 people died. In preparation for the roles, the actors got to know survivors.
Meeting Maher was incredible.
Former Paralympian Gaz Chowdhury plays Maher Kuder, a disabled resident who was stuck on the 9th floor and fell repeatedly down the stairs as he escaped the burning building.
It's a shame that it's not surprising, and it's a shame that it's not a situation where I feel like much has changed. So I think it's important for people to hear it in a journey like this.
I live in the Royal Borough of...
The play is by the South African-born writer Gillian Slovo, who started meeting survivors just a few months after the fire.
There is a reason why I like to do subjects like Grenfell, because I lived in South Africa during apartheid days. I'm the daughter of 2 prominent anti-apartheid activists, and I learned from a very early age what inequality can do.
We said at the time it's going to take a catastrophe here.
One of the play's characters is Edward Daffan, a resident who warned about a catastrophic fire 6 months before the tragedy. There have been some criticism that Grenfell shouldn't be made into a play. What's your view?
There are still buildings covered with flammable cladding, as long as there hasn't been a single clink of arrests and handcuffs. It's really, really important that we have plays like Grenfell to keep Grenfell in the public consciousness.
6 years on, the story of Grenfell is still waiting for its curtain call of justice. Rags Martel, News at 10.
And that is sadly all we have time for tonight, I'm afraid. The main developments, those two new developments on the as yet still unnamed BBC presenter. That's it. Good night and thank you for watching.
Today, it could be pouring in many places, but not for a little while. Heinz Tomato Ketchup sponsors ITV National Weather.
Hello again, a very good evening to you. I hope you've had a lovely day. You may have noticed we've moved into a much more unsettled regime of sunny spells and showers, and we continue with that for the rest of this week and into next week as well. Worth knowing that we could be seeing some much heavier rain moving in on Friday. Stay up to date with the latest for that developing situation. But for the here and now, tonight is going to end on a much drier note than we started the evening because, as you can see, we've really just got those showers condensed into the northern parts of England, southern Scotland and the far northern parts of Scotland. Temperatures much more comfortable for sleeping. Tomorrow is going to be a largely dry start to the day, but very quickly those showers once again get going, speckling right across the UK, and we are going to be seeing some decent sunshine in between. Temperatures, though, returning to around or fractionally below the seasonal average. But as I say, we stick with the unsettled weather for the next few days, sunny spells or showers with the risk of heavier rain from the west on Friday. Good night, sleep well.
Heinz Tomato Ketchup sponsors ITV.